Hi everyone, it's Martin here, and we're just going to start the live feed for the next segment for the program on Triple H tonight, Streetbeat.
Terrible in winter, because the sun.
I'm here with Neil and the principal from Northholm Grammar School, Miss Bradbury, but we're not on live at the moment, so anyway, enjoy and send messages if you want. We can answer questions. But yeah. So how long did it take you to get over?
It wasn't a bad run, maybe 35 minutes.
Is that all? And where'd you park?
McDonald's.
McDonald's?
Oh, once you said McDonald's, I thought that's good.
Yeah, you need to get a parking spot.
Yeah. And it was full actually. It was. Yeah. I had one of those awkward sort of car parks, but that's all right. That's good.
Where do you park, Neil, when you come in?
McDonald's.
Today
I've got a park outside Repco today, so I come up that way and always check to see if there's a park out Repco way. But as I say, one day we're going to move to a studio where I don't take my life in my hands crossing the road to get to the show.
I crossed.
I was
a bit worried about time, and
so did you ring the studio? Was that you rang the studio? Yes, I saw you go to the phone because we're the only ones in here.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
Mind you, mine was up there. Would have rung in the middle of it if you rang me.
This is Mike Allen with the Hornsby Ku-ring-gai headlines. Hornsby Council is launching its new waste matters strategy. The strategy aims to increase the amount of waste diverted from local landfill by 10% over the next 3 years.
So I guess what we'll do is I'll start the HSC stuff.
Yes.
And then I'll get you just to say who you are. Maybe whatever you feel comfortable experience.
Yes.
Bring the table and then.
So just go back to schools on tour.
Yeah, that's right.
Responsibilities.
Yeah, that's right. And then. And with the HSC side of it, it's obviously the academic, but I think also when you look at the well-being, the self, that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Relationship at home and school.
And then the parents, and then also students have siblings.
Yes, that's right.
Always,
Yes.
That's
Yes.
So that's always interesting as well.
Yeah.
So that's all right. And we've got I lost it. No, I haven't. We've got the agenda here as well. In terms of
that's good. Yeah. So we're currently music on at the moment. And
yeah, I think this is the news. Is this the local news? It is. He's not listening. Yeah. It's funny being in here because it just gets. Everyone concentrates, and all of a sudden the white bulb goes on. The switch flicks. So that's all right. I saw on the radio that the halfback and the 5'8" are Para playing against each other in the nines.
Oh wow! Because that's
New Zealand.
New Zealand, and you're right.
They are. I saw that post on Twitter. So
Interesting to see how that goes. That starts soon, doesn't it? That's for 6 o'clock.
Yeah, I think it's So that's all right.
Looking at big attendances there.
That's all right.
So it's harder this time than footy's over.
My birthday was last week. Nick and Ali, what they did was they bought me slippers, Parramatta slippers.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I've made myself a rule. I'm not going to talk about Parramatta in the off season. So now I'm talking about the Kansas City Chiefs.
Good.
Yeah. So that's all right.
Yeah. Oh well, they had a good year this year. They've set themselves up to have a better one next year.
No, so that's good. What's next?
I'm done. I'm all set.
You're all set now?
Do you follow baseball?
No. Do you follow the overseas
stuff?
stuff? The NFL or anything, Neil?
The NFL, I follow in this finals. What do they call it over there?
The Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That for me, that stems back to I was actually working in San Francisco in 1982 when the 49ers won the Super Bowl. I think for the first time in a long time.
Yes,
Joe Montana was the quarterback at the time. And I have never seen a city convulse like that. It was unbelievable. There were people on the streets, there were firearms being shot, it was just a roiling mass of crowds and celebrating as only Americans can do. And ever since then I've followed it closely.
Yeah. And that's San Francisco? Yeah. I've been to that stadium. It's phenomenal, isn't it? With the water in the background.
Well, I wasn't at the stadium. I was actually working there, and I went to a party.
Oh, okay.
A Super Bowl party, and oh my God, it was mostly with the people from the hotel. So I followed it ever since. But the 49ers, they were good in the 80s, but they haven't really come back since then.
No.
So what's next?
The gig guide.
Gig
Yeah.
guide.
Yeah. So we've got about 2 minutes. I'm going to do the forecast. And
Okay. Any traffic?
yeah, just as bad. Spit Bridge is breakdown, and Camerade's breakdown. It'll be quick. Friday afternoon. Nothing on Pennant Hills Road yet.
That's rare. We could bring Chris on the way
I'll
through,
give you
and
an
you can give a
update.
live
Yes,
report.
yeah, from here to Southwest Sydney.
I was going down to a race in Canberra last year, remember, and I sent you text messages about traffic on Pennant Hills
that's
Road.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was in March. So that's all right, that's good.
And how's your week been?
It's good. Busy with the HSC,
Yeah.
and then we've got a few timetabling things we've got to do.
Okay, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so we're flat chat with that at the moment, but I'm not part of that.
Okay.
And it's all this time of the year in a school, Neil. It's timetabling. The budget was mainly done in schools last term. That's probably ongoing. You know more than me. Then and then we do class allocations, but then also staff, because the jobs come up now. So staff start putting in there, and then the jigsaw
The
puzzle.
trading
That's
season,
exactly
the
right.
trading
Yes,
season,
yeah,
is it?
Yeah. You know what? I reckon there's a book in that. It's like
There
football.
is actually, definitely.
I reckon
28
there'd be
seconds.
parallels between NRL teams and schools.
Yeah.
Where Trent Robinson is the coach.
Is there,
Yeah.
is there a season you can't trade up until this day? Or,
Oh, yeah. It'd be interesting if we had a draft.
I think-
That would be fantastic.
Gee, that would be fascinating.
10 seconds.
It's yeah, well, term 3 is that big recruitment season, and it continues in term 4, and you just hope that
there's been a breakdown on Spit Bridge over there in Mossman. A truck's broken down, and that's affecting one of... Excuse me, folks. There's been a breakdown in Mossman on the Spit Bridge. Truck broken down there, and that's affecting one of 3 northbound lanes. Just what you want on a Friday afternoon. Over there in Camaray on the Warringah Freeway approaching Miller Street, a car is broken down. But the site has now been cleared, but of course everything is backed up, and that is affecting northbound traffic once again. So you know, the local area is pretty clear, Hornsby, Ku-ring-gai, but the roads leading in and out I think are going to be pretty clogged.
Yo, what's up? You're listening to Streetbeat, Triple H 100.
Well, Neil, what I'd like to do this afternoon for the next segment is something we started last year, but was sort of just me waffling on, you know, from which you and I can do.
That's what we love about you.
Very kind of you. But we planned it earlier in the year when we had that think tank that I didn't go to with Justine and you and Mariko, remember? And we thought we'd sort of line up an HSC discussion bit. And 2 days, one day ago, the HSC started. You know what? I struggle. It's H or HSC. So for the linguists at home who are listening to me,
Well,
I'll just say what it is. What do you? How do you say?
Well, I think if you live to the west of the Pacific Highway, you say H.
All right.
And if you live to the east, as I do, you say H.
Well, I've got both because I've lived on both sides. So there you go.
Okay.
Anyway, the HSC started yesterday with English, and they've mixed it around a bit so we don't get the same subjects finishing at the same time at the end of the 2 or 3 week cycle. So they had English yesterday, and they've had English again today, and they had music as well. And this time around, so it's not just us. We've asked, and we're very grateful that this year the new principal for Northholm Grammar, Chris Bradbury, has come to join us. Person with a lot of experience, but I'll introduce Chris. And Chris, welcome to the show, and why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Thank you very much for having me. I started my teaching career at Helston Agricultural High School some years ago. I'm a history legal studies teacher, and from Helston I moved on to the King's School at Parramatta and continued to teach history and legal studies, as well as taking on the roles as head of history, legal studies and director of teaching and learning. So within that time, I've been blessed to have the opportunity to work with a number of students in regards to preparing them to be in the best possible position to do well in HSC examinations, and find myself now leading Northholm Grammar School, which is a tremendous opportunity, a wonderful school, co-educational environment in semi-rural Arcadia, and really continuing to push, I think, those key facets of education, which is scholarship, a real focus on learning, as well as quality pastoral care. And I think that's really important when we're talking about the HSC and education in general, that we get that balance right between the academics and the wellbeing.
So in your early days of teaching, and you're very young from that point of view, what was some of the, when you had your first HSC class, take us back to that day, and what was it like as a new teacher, and how did you help the students?
There's a real sense of excitement. Remember it vividly, because as a teacher, when you're taking on a HSC class, and this continues, but certainly for the first time, I think you understand the real enormity of the situation, the fact that you're entrusted to lead those students in front of you to be in the best possible position, to be able to perform well, to do the very best they can. But at the same time, it's a campaign, it's a journey. And it begins in Year 11, when you go through the Year 11 course, which was the preliminary course, as it was titled then. And then in term 4 of that year, you move into the HSC course. So you build really positive, strong relationships. But I do remember that first year vividly, because I think I was probably more nervous than the students when they went into that exam. Obviously wanting to be in a position that I'd prepared them in the best possible way, and I remember well waiting outside when they'd completed that exam, and I'll never forget the smiles on their faces. Fortunately, they were happy with the paper.
And what subject was it?
It was legal studies.
And how many students did you have then?
18.
18, yeah. And it was a co-ed, or?
It was co-ed, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're still in contact with those students? Do you see any of them, or hear from them, or know what they're doing?
One or two in those early years at Helston, but certainly at King's, and I think the beauty of social media and the fact that information's readily available, it's quite easy to be able to track where students are at. And I think that's the beauty of education and teaching, the fact that you build those relationships. And from a teaching point of view, I think that we're very much in awe of the skill and the hard work that students put into this particular year, and what's involved. And at the same time, students are incredibly appreciative of the work that teachers put in terms of getting the very best out of them. So it's a real satisfying aspect, and there's nothing that makes you more proud than seeing students succeed when they leave school.
So, so zooming out, if I can, what would be a couple of the things that you would suggest to parents at home who are on day 2 and there's potential a few meltdowns and things like that? How would you suggest parents attack working with their sons or daughters over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think there's quite often a fine balance, isn't there, in terms of that level of intervention and support that parents provide, because the students are obviously very tense. But I think it's really important that there is that close association, and the parents are demonstrating that they obviously care and they're there to support their sons and daughters, and that's understanding their sons and daughters in terms of what they like and the type of space that they're obviously comfortable with, and what they're not. I actually find that once that first exam takes place, that can quite often relieve the tension. I know, speaking to students this afternoon who have just completed paper 2, there's a real sense of relief, and I quite often talk about that essentially there's this build up to the first exam, and once that's completed, and then paper 2 the following day, they're well and truly into it. So I think for parents, it's that level of support, asking questions, ensuring that I think those key ingredients of well-being are being maintained, that students are sleeping well, they're eating right, they're having breakfast, they're looking after themselves. And if there's that shared love and collaboration, well, then that puts the student in the best possible position.
Well, I've been teaching for a few years, Chris, and a lot of those messages are similar, but one of my most recent principals, her biggest message each time was feed them and love them.
That's right.
Make sure you give them plenty of food, and make sure they sleep, and basically let them go up and down with the dial, but keep your dial down so you don't react to them.
That's great advice, and I think it actually highlights where education's quite progressive at this particular stage, because we're talking about the HSC now, but I think it's being mindful, well, what does the preparation look like 2, 4, 6 years in advance? So when we talk about aspects like eating, study habits, sleeping habits, and so forth, I think it's really important for schools to be conscious of those facets very early on, so that they develop those well-being habits to put themselves in an optimal position for those final exams.
And your little slip there, coach, I think that's true as well.
Absolutely.
I think, there's a lot of structured guidance we need to provide for students that we work with. What are some of the characteristics of what not to do as a student right now in the middle of the HSC? that note-taking, revision. The biggest thing I've found is that a lot of students take too many notes and come out frustrated that they didn't use everything.
Definitely. And that's the challenge with the HSC, that in each particular subject there's so much content. And at the end of the day, in a 3-hour exam, you are only examined on part of that. So the key aspect is obviously to be able to have that knowledge and understanding of the whole syllabus, but at the same time to be mindful that it needs to be relevant and accurate in terms of what you're projecting at that stage.
Oh, well, we'll be back talking to Chris a little bit more after these messages.
Goes quickly, doesn't it?
It's unbelievable. I was quite shocked when I looked up and thought, it's 10 minutes.
Was that 10 minutes for us
10
chatting?
minutes.
I know, it flies when you're chatting away. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Would you be able to, because I know you sometimes, would you be able to podcast this one out?
I can.
Yeah, that would be really good, because it's sort of useful, and I might then keep track of the different HSC ones we have. Can I borrow your phone again? I'll get a photo of you and Chris in here as well.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll use your PayPal if you like. What do you want me to buy? It doesn't know my fingerprints, sorry.
No, it doesn't, no.
Just stay steady, mate. We'll do it casual. Yeah.
I was actually listening to a podcast just this week when I was off on my morning walk about the American maths curriculum and the controversy of teach to test. I might slip that one in.
All right, yeah.
Later, where they've sort of flipped it around, realising they can't change the curriculum because there's too much entrenched opposition. So what they've done is change the test.
Oh, okay.
So that if people want to pass the test, they have to teach these things.
All right.
Right. So do you know what I mean? Like, instead of changing the curriculum and then testing it,
Yes.
they've changed the test so that people, that's effectively changed the curriculum.
The curriculum, that's right, yes.
I thought it was really interesting the way they went about it.
No, it's
So,
good.
apparently the Americans have a problem with their maths. I don't know. Something to do with putting a man on the moon.
Are you comfortable if we talk about, say, see this section there?
Yes.
Are you happy to talk about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that would be relevant.
Yeah, so I'll go through tips.
Yeah,
Yes,
and I won't talk about that, but you can
30
flag that
seconds.
with your.
No problem.
So I might sort of say, give us some tips for your top 10.
Yes,
Or
yeah.
top 20 in any school. And then we're going to have we've got at least 2 more segments with commercials. So he's not listening. I keep forgetting because the headphones there can't hear us. So he just talks to us. Yeah, that's what one of the second one's been said. Freedom and love.
That's right, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
Message, same time.
It's
Every time.
simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Says it all.
Yeah.
You happy with how it's going?
Oh yeah, that's great. You just yeah, what we trying to do. Welcome back to Triple H 100.1, and you're on the Streetbeat program on a Friday afternoon. Did I get that right, Neil?
Yes, you did.
I'm getting better. I need some
You're
training.
going from a high standard to a very high standard.
Or the other way. Anyway, what we're doing now is we're just following up our conversation with Chris Bradbury from Northholm Grammar School, the principal there. And before the break, we were discussing, how parents are looking after kids and things like that. What I'd like to shift now, because when you introduced yourself earlier on, you spoke about a few things, learning and emotional well-being, and in the jargon cells, emotional learning in schools.
That's right.
So we'll come back to that a bit later on. What would be your tips, say, for the top 20 students in any class or year group, maybe as a principal or as a classroom teacher, whatever angle you want to take, Chris?
Definitely. I always like to start with deliberate practice. I think that's absolutely crucial. It's absolutely vital that students place themselves in a position where they develop the knowledge and understanding that's required in each content area, and that can be achieved obviously through consistent revision, but at the same time they need to be able to practice what's required in the examination. And I think there's particular stages to that. Firstly, it's important for students to practice when they have notes in front of them, they have the information, so they can obviously develop the skills, they have the relevant knowledge and content that's required for that particular response, or they're able to solve the problems if we're looking at maths and so forth. But then they can vary that particular practice. They may particularly focus on an aspect of the course or a particular part of the essay or a area of the problem solving of the examination, so that it's conducive to developing the skills that they need to deliver. If you practice, you're then able to recall information easier.
So following up from that, I'm holding in my hand here a pen. And one of the things I found with HSC students is, especially after the DER, the Digital Education Revolution of 2008, their ability to write. I don't have a problem with it, but I'm just wondering what your approach is. Is there any deliberate practice you do on that front with your students at your school or schools?
I definitely do, and we try to break it down in the following areas. In terms of understanding the skills and content, we don't find it an issue if that means that the students are to use their computer and type out their essays in terms of generating practice responses, but there needs to be an evolution moving to using the pen and obviously writing their responses, and at the same time doing so under examination conditions.
You're exactly right, because when I do it with my students and I talk about it, I say, just imagine you're writing a 3-hour letter to your grandmother.
That's right.
About what you did in the holidays and how would you go? How would you go writing for 3 hours, Neil, these days?
I would have no problem at all, but actually thinking about it though, I've participated in my own digital revolution as well, and so maybe I wouldn't have the strength or the muscle development in my hand anymore.
You've picked on a winner. A lot of my students, girls, say that. They say their hands are actually sore. So you actually need deliberate practice about the physicality of using a pen. And some of them are really cluey across the state. They put weights on their pen.
They do?
They do. Do you
What?
know the reasoning for that, Chris?
Like gym weights?
No, not quite that, but Chris, let us know.
I think the idea there is that if you can write as fast as you can with that weight on your pen, and then you take the weight off when it comes to exams, you'll write faster. So it's to accelerate the pace of how much you can write under examination conditions.
That makes sense, actually. That makes a lot of sense. I wonder how we can apply that to practice on the radio for me.
Well, your weight's on your jaw.
Weights on your jaw.
That may work.
Well, so your jaw muscles improve. Now, is it time for me to interrupt with a question from a listener?
Yes. Wonder who's called us.
Well, it's a question for Chris, and it's a two-part question, as they always are.
Are we allowed to know who it is?
Yes, it is. It's a lady by the name of Justine from Dural.
Okay.
And she says, is HSC outdated? Is it still relevant for students to rote learn in the information age?
It's a terrific question because it forms the basis of the educational debate in terms of its purpose. I'll probably begin with the strengths. What I do like about the HSC is that I think that it provides a framework upon which we are looking at the key disciplines that students can develop knowledge and understanding of, and at the same time it's not necessarily a test of sheer intelligence, but really hard work. So students at particular levels and capabilities, I think, have the capacity to do very well in the HSC by working hard, building those relationships with their teachers, having the organisational framework to be able to meet the objectives of the HSC. Where I do see a problem, and where it does fall in the trap of being outdated, is its inability to develop and I think gauge a student's competencies in those 21st century skills. So we're really at a time where we understand that both intelligence but also emotional intelligence is important. We want to ensure that when our students leave school, they've developed skills in collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, teamwork, communication and so forth. And the HSC in its current format, I don't think effectively does that, which means that there is an onus and responsibility of schools to prepare students for the HSC, but at the same time to prepare them well for those key competencies, because that will ensure success when they leave school.
Because what we have, Neil, is, and Justine listening in, is we have the Australian curriculum, and there's a component of the Australian curriculum. You've got the content for the new syllabuses we're teaching, and you have what's called general capabilities. And you have cross-curriculum priorities. And the general capabilities are those 21st century skills that Chris was talking about. There's ICT and there's numeracy and literacy and critical thinking. There's 7 of them from memory. And they're the sort of things that can catch students out. So for example, yesterday in the English paper, they had a question where they looked at, I think it was 1984, and the theme they looked at was isolation. they had another, the name escapes me now, but what's the Shakespeare play with the witches?
Hamlet.
No, it's
No,
not Hamlet,
Macbeth.
so I've got the
Macbeth.
wrong one. There's another one. But anyway, basically the theme for whatever that question, what, Crucible? Repeat the Crucible?
Oh, the Crucible,
Yeah,
yeah.
Crucible.
That is not Shakespeare.
No, sorry. There you go. That's why I'm a geography teacher. Sorry.
That's right. So you know where the play was.
Yeah.
But you don't know.
I'm getting a
who
mix
wrote
up. I guess the essence of what I'm trying to say there is that the focus theme for that one was love, and apparently there's not. I don't know much about the play. And that caused a bit of grief for some students. I went onto Twitter straight afterwards to check. But a lot of students liked it who had been taught in a way to deal with the 21st century skills because they're able to think on their feet.
That's
Any
right.
thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the key functions I think of the HSC as well. That it is a test, and we don't want to over-test within our system. But one of the benefits is obviously dealing with pressure and being able to cope with situations within a time frame. And I think that's a really good example in that students being able to obviously work from what they've got, and I think understanding that whatever the question is, everyone who's sitting that paper is sitting the same question.
That's right.
Therefore, it really comes down to how do you handle that moment and that situation under pressure. So that's something that we obviously need to develop and learn in life.
When you did tests, Neil,
Look, I'm old school with this. Is I was a late night crammer.
Yeah.
In the last week before the exam, it was successful for me. I had a fairly successful academic career until I hit university at precisely the wrong time, which was the early 1970s. Then it all fell down. But so I'm quite comfortable with rote learning, with cramming. But I also see that's not going to work these days. On the one hand, you get me started on this. On the one hand, I see the benefit, and neuroscientists will agree with me, of rote learning certain things like timetables. There are things that you need to carry around with you, and one of them is basic, arithmetic tables. But I do think, as you say, reacting to pressure, all these things can be taught. Being able to think on your feet, knowing where to get the information rather than knowing what the information is, I think is probably...
Well, exactly right, because I remember 3.1415926543.
Oh, well, you're doing
And
better
so,
than I am.
but and I just bring that out.
I remember about 3.
But that's the key skill, isn't it? It's what you can memorise and know, but essentially it comes down to how you apply it. And I think that's the key skill throughout the whole process, because the better students will be able to demonstrate understanding. So whilst it's okay to memorise facts and details, you need to be able to answer the question. And that means that you need to be able to navigate through what the question is asking, getting to the heart of it, and that can only be achieved through understanding, which is that ability to not just simply review in your preparation, but to recall. And if you're constantly recalling something, well then you're going to keep that in your memory. And it comes back to that whole key adage, I think, in terms of learning, that you want students to be able to transfer as much as possible from working memory to long-term memory, and then to be able to apply that not just in exams, but obviously conversations.
And you mentioned, Neil, the neuroscience. There's a lot of stuff out there now on the brain, and I don't know the parts of the brain. I won't go there. I was pretty bad with the English a minute ago. But there are things there that people are saying about, a bit of the working memory that Chris just said then, and a few other things like that. And it's really moved a lot in the 30 years that I've been teaching. There's a conscious decision to hit that space. And I've got this little thing, it's not very scientific. I have this little statement that I really do believe, but I struggle with at time, depth over breadth.
Yes.
Get the detail, get the sort of recall working memory in space, and then you can sort of cast the net out and be able to deal with things. The question I was going to ask you before, Neil, was, and I want to segue this into the social emotional learning side of the HSC. Have you ever been in an exam and panicked? And how did you deal with it?
I've been in an exam where I looked at the paper and I thought, I am done for. I remember.
Did you get a physical response? What was it like for you?
No, because it was physics in final year, what in New Zealand at the time we called university entrance. And I believe my score at the end of it was 25 out of 100 or something like that, but that's because I left after an hour. I must admit I didn't have other than annoyance, I didn't have a panicked reaction to it, no. No, I didn't.
And what about you, Chris? What about you? Have you had an exam that you thought, oh geez, I thought I'm being caught out here, or?
You certainly have your moments, and I think it goes back to that point that we discussed, that when you are placed in that very challenging situation, that you just take your time. I think you really need to have a solid understanding of, well, what's being asked of me here, what do I need to do, and to try to break it down. And there's a real skill, I think, in terms of preparation with that, because the immediate response is to panic. But in essence, I think it's about taking a deep breath. I think really being conscious of what's being asked and then trying to break it down. And then once you get started, you move away from that position of anxiety and you can start to make some real progress. And I think taking your time and just trying to relax under those moments of anxiety.
I do remember one of the best bits of advice I got, and we're talking about a long time ago here for my high school examinations, was read the whole paper first, then decide what order you're going to answer the questions. And now I don't know if the exams are the same there, and I do remember my physics teacher, who still considers me a failure, saying, don't leave the hard question till last, or the long question. Don't leave the long question till last. Leave the short questions till last if you can, because you know it's harder to cram in a long answer than it is to cram in a short answer.
That's right, and you actually touch on a key point, I think, about the HSC, is the strategy that's involved. The trial HSC examinations are really important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it provides the opportunity for the student to understand how well they know the content and how well they can perform in the HSC environment before they get to that point. But they really need to leave that particular paper, and when they get their results back, strategise how will they better meet those needs and demands when they get into the HSC. So it goes back to that point. What section of the paper are you going to answer first? Is it going to be the one you feel most comfortable with? If history, for example, is it going to be source analysis, because you can utilise the reading time to look at the sources, so you've covered that base, you can get straight into those questions, then move on to the essay components. I think you need to be mindful in terms of that strategy, so that when you go into the exam, it allows you to obviously better meet those demands that's being asked of you.
And in many subjects they have sources, and what that does is it relaxes you. It might give you a bit of idea of what else is there, and you can come back to and use it as stimulus material for other questions. In my case, geography, it's always the case. I've often encouraged students to look at the stimulus material first, because that might trigger a few memories or facts in the background that you can apply to the question. So that makes a big difference.
So do we think of HSC as the sorting hat? You know, the Harry Potter analogy. Is it the sorting hat that determines which house you're going to go into for the rest of your life?
Certainly not. I think it's very important in terms of that moment in time. But the reality is that after you achieve that particular mark and you make your decision in terms of where you're going to go, there's certainly more to life. And I think that's one of the critical lessons that comes out of the HSC, that you need to put into perspective.
Let's just move into sort of tips and tricks. If you've got any tips and tricks for people, you know, say 3 things. Let me put it this way, Chris, sorry. What are, say, 2 things, and actually I've done homework on this, so you're at a disadvantage to me, is what are 2 things that you shouldn't do to be successful in the HSC, and what are 2 things you should do to be successful in the HSC?
Well, I think 2 things that you shouldn't do is you don't want to leave your run too late. So it is a year program. So you want to ensure that you're organised, you're on top of your work, and you don't want to find yourself in a position late in that particular year where you understand that there's a lot of content and knowledge that you need to catch up on, and that's going to put you behind and obviously add to the stress that you've got. And another thing that you don't want to do is obviously lack that detail and understanding of what's required within the course. So I think it goes back to the very premise of the start, that you have to understand the syllabus, you need to understand the requirements, what's involved. If you don't know the terms of what's required, that's going to put you in a bad position. It doesn't help, does it? Yeah, you need to talk about the right period of history or the right text. And in terms of 2 things that I think are absolutely critical, I think balance. I think balance is absolutely crucial. That Yes, it's a stressful year, there's pressure and you want to do your very best in exams, but you also want to build those important relationships with your peers and spend time with your family and friends. I think that's crucial because I always say to Year 12, this is the year you'll never forget. There's friendships and relationships that you'll form that you'll remember and keep in contact for the rest of your life, so balance is important.
Music you'll listen to for the rest of your life.
That's right.
That's it.
And you'll think it's the golden age.
That's it.
Look, we do have to take another break. Do you have 5 more minutes after the break to continue talking?
Yeah, I certainly do. Thank you.
Fantastic.
That's good. So, my tips and tricks
Yes.
come from sport.
Ah,
of course.
very good. Yes, yes.
And we have it, and depending how far you want to go, after this segment, we have a little segment where we call "What have you been reading, listening to, or watching?"
Oh, okay.
So if we get time for it and you want to stay here a little bit longer for 5 minutes, you can be part of that.
Oh, okay. Yep,
If you
yep,
want,
yep.
so if you want to, you can sort of then we might just ask you if you want to. But if you've got a race off, I understand. I'll leave that.
Yeah, no problem at all.
So
No,
have a
thank
bit
you.
of think about what you're reading and what
Okay,
you're doing.
yes, yep.
Just make it a bit more casual for you. You did well. You didn't answer my question. I want to find out when you had your, if you had any scenario where you panicked or had.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I sort of curved around that, but
Yeah.
yeah. Look, I mean, in terms of exams, I mean, most of the courses I've done recently have been hands-ins and so forth. But I do remember vividly, which I learned about answering the question was in my Year 12 trial English paper, and it was a bit like the Crucible question.
Yeah.
We studied Hamlet. The question was, how was Hamlet a play about love? And I'd prepared for a revenge tragedy question, so that's what I wrote about.
Yeah. Oh, so you wrote about love.
And I learned 14 out of 25 later that that's a mistake.
Well, in '78, when I did the maths paper, 2 unit, it's gone down in history as the worst paper ever.
Okay,
I don't know much about it, but I remember there getting actually a physical response, going, "Oh, what am I going to do?" And I did well. I got first in 2 unit maths. I thought, "Oh, this is doing me out," and I just had to compose myself.
Yeah,
I've
we've
never
got
done before.
about 10 seconds.
Yeah, 10 seconds. Yes, we're back on Triple H 100.1 FM on Streetbeat with Neil and Chris Bradbury from Northholm Grammar School, talking around the HSC and study techniques and things like that. Before we went to the break, I asked Chris the question about what 2 things not to do for the HSC and 2 things what to do. And we have a segment after this, Chris, and you're welcome to stay if you would like to, where we talk about what we've been reading and doing and the rest of it. And one of the things I've listened to was the Howie Games podcast recently, and it was actually the racing car driver from Bathurst last week before,
Yes.
and his story, and he's got a great story there. But during the program, they asked Howie asked him the question, what are 2 things that you shouldn't do for success? And he said you shouldn't focus on the fear of failure.
Yes.
That was the first one. It was quite interesting. And I liked this one as well. And he said don't focus on the outcome.
Yes.
So I really like that because, as you know, we've been talking online about the parallels between sport and success in life and things like that. So I'm really into it in the same way you might have similar things about success in music or something like that, Neil. With
If
people.
only I played an instrument.
Maybe the people that you know. But then the other side, which I thought was really interesting, he talked about the idea of what to do with success is acceptance. And I knew that because I was just a hard-working Band 5 current student, but got myself into Band 6 and got into 10% of the state and all that sort of stuff many years ago. But that was for just accepted where I was, where I fitted in the pecking order, and don't have self-esteem issues over it, and just get on with it. And the other thing that I really liked is the other thing that you should do is execute.
Yes.
So if you practice and you do things, we were talking off air how I had a bit of a panic attack during the maths paper in 1978, and I was almost debilitated, saying, what am I going to do here? Because I was doing well, I thought I'm going to fall apart, and thought, then all of a sudden it kicked in. I've done so many of these questions before. I went to, like I said, one of the easier questions and I calmed down.
Yes.
And so that's what I reckon. Anyway, that's from my point of view.
Any final tips from you, Chris?
I think that reinforcement of preparation and organisation throughout the year. I think, like Martin said, don't focus on the outcome because essentially you want to focus on the process. And the process is one that takes time. and understand that there's strengths that you have, there's areas that you're good at, but at the same time, I think to be honest and authentic about where your limitations are. And if you understand where they are, you're able to obviously focus on those through deliberate practice. The year allows you an opportunity for growth and improvement, and if you are very conscious of that growth and improvement throughout the process, you'll find yourself in a position come exam time where you're as prepared as you can be, and ultimately the outcome will come, and it'll be one that you'll be proud of.
Well, that is very interesting. I mean, because that's a theme that runs through management training now too, isn't it? Which is, reward the process, not the result.
That's right.
And I noticed with my grandson playing sport now, they choose the man of the match, as they all love to do. 7-year-olds running around playing soccer, is the man of the match is the person of the match, because it's all mixed teams, is the person who executed the coach's instructions as instructed.
That's right.
As it were.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was very, very interesting and a better way of doing things.
That's right, and I think with that process, which is another link with sport and education, is the concept of effort. I know as a principal and as a teacher, that's something that I'm constantly advocating. That's what we're looking for in every young man and young woman, is that we have the effort. If we see the effort, the outcome, the achievement will be there, but it's giving it your best.
Okay. Well, that brings us, I think we have to bring it to a close now.
So, Chris, thanks a lot for coming in, and good luck in your first year in the principalship at Northholm Grammar, and I hope the students do really well for themselves, their family.
Is this your first year?
That's right.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you very much. No, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it's always good to be able to discuss important issues in terms of HSC and education, and obviously to be mindful of those key areas from all particular perspectives, from educating point of view as well as for parents, and to assist them in what can be a stressful year, but a highly productive one.
Great, thanks Chris for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think we're just, without a musical break, going to go straight into the final segment of the afternoon, which is, what media have you been consuming this week? What have you been reading?
And I'm pointing to you, Neil, because I've been concentrating here. Let me get my thoughts
You have,
together.
and you know me, I could go on and on and on. Well, look, I'm happy to report that this week, in fact, in the space of a day, I got the new John le Carre novel. I'm not sure if any of you follow John le Carre. Yes, Smiley made, his famous novel, of course, is The Man Who Came In From the Cold, or The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which in fact was his third novel after A Murder of Quality, which is the first time Smiley was introduced. But if you followed le Carre over the years, he has followed the current political trends, and so this new book, which is called Agent Running in the Field, is full of Brexit, it's full of Trump, it's full of Ukrainian and Russian oligarchs living in London. It's about, the intersection now, particularly in Britain, which is, just a centre of money laundering. London City has for years now. It's got more billionaires living in London than there is in any other city in the world, and most of those are Russians or Eastern European. So there's a lot of black money in London, and some people, and it's hinted at in the book, is saying this is the reason for, the forces behind Brexit. So le Carre builds a, spy novel with all these things around it. I've read every single one of his books. I love it. I highly recommend it to everyone. Agent Running in the Field, John le Carre.
That's good. And Chris, I'll just give you background. Normally comes up he's read a book on probability or calculus or something like that.
Well, I finished the book on DNA.
Yeah, the DNA.
And I did, but if I was to describe that, I'd be here for hours.
Okay, what about you, Chris?
So I'm currently reading a book called 7 Myths in Education. So it's obviously focused on what we're looking at specifically in terms of best teaching practice. It's written by an educationalist in the UK, Daisy Christodoulou, who's a terrific educational researcher, and essentially through the research she's conducted in a number of universities, highlighting 7 key myths that need to be dispelled. And one of them is really looking at that idea of, should we teach a knowledge-based curriculum, or should we simply teach skills and competencies? And obviously we recognise that there's a key focus on skills and competencies, but Daisy's arguing, which I think is a really good point, that we should never lose sight of a knowledge content-rich curriculum, because if we want students to be able to be critical thinkers, creative, problem solvers, work in teams, then they need to have the knowledge and understanding to be able to do that. She also talks about the principles of explicit teaching, teachers and also parents being very clear in regards to what young people need to know and to understand, so you can break those particular fundamentals down, and ultimately what makes a conducive learning environment. So I find her ideas refreshing. I think she understands some of those key concepts in terms of progressive education, but she's a traditionalist at heart, and quite often if we want to know what works, we go back in terms of what happened years ago, and I think a lot of the answers are there, and we need to make sure that we don't lose them.
Well, before you start though, sorry, could you just repeat the book and the author again, because that sounds interesting.
Yeah, so 7 Myths of Education, Daisy Christodoulou.
We've got a challenge for the academic award this week. It won't be me, let me assure you, this week. This week I've gone on a detox. And what I've done is I stopped my 2 newspaper subscriptions.
A digital detox.
The digital detox. No, I've still got
or
my phone.
a
I can't go without my
knowledge
phone.
detox.
No, not knowledge detox. I've just shifted it. And then I've had Foxtel since Galaxy in 1996. I worked out, don't tell Jenny, I've probably spent about 25,000 if you think about that, in digital media. The cost of being a digital person is a fortune when you throw in like all those years away, at $100 a month or whatever it is, which is crazy. So I got, and the thing is with it is, as I said, Foxtel will leave you there but not offer you the promotion. So I went back in and I got rid of the box, reduced it just to sport, entertainment and movies, and I'm down to about $70. So I'm really happy about that. But the one podcast I have been listening to, and I actually got this from a previous teacher from your school, Hadley, and he put me onto a podcast called Limetown.
Okay.
And I was listening to that, and you would like it, Neil. Sorry, I'm pointing to Neil. And it's a podcast about basically Limetown.
Yep, I'm subscribing.
The geography of me thought there's got to be some caves there somewhere, and there are, because I thought of the limestone and the rest of it. And basically, it's a community that was doing experiments on mind transference without talking. So you got an implant, Neil, and I got an implant. You and I can sort of mentally talk to each other, but Chris wouldn't have a clue about what we're saying to him about it. So I got into the first series. The second series is a little bit too much for me. Limetown, but I think you'd like it because one of Neil's ones is science fiction. So,
it is. It certainly is.
So that's all from me, from that side of things.
Because you know they have invented, or they've invented this way of transferring data directly from external sources into the human brain now.
Well, this is what this is, and basically that without giving too much away.
So this is a joke.
Oh, sorry. Oh, here we go. Well, you're talking science fiction, mate. I don't know.
They call it reading.
Man, I'm having a week off. You caught me about 3 times today.
Okay, look, that's it, folks. That's Streetbeat for another week. Thank you, Chris, for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
I think the students of Northholm Grammar are very lucky people.
Thank you very much. I'm lucky to be there.
Thanks, Neil, and I might come back next week.
Well, I think it was high stakes for you this week, though, wasn't it? Because having a peer in is more stress than having a complete stranger in, I always find.
All right, then we'll have a report card later on, okay?
Okay, we'll do that. Look, hang around for The Bench, which is coming up shortly later this evening. It's That's Lit with Shazzy D, which is always worth listening to. Lots of literature, lots of modern music. On Sunday, there's the Festival of the Arts opening down at Wallarobba at 1 p.m. I think you'll find me there, and I'm also going to go to the National Poetry Slam competition on Sunday evening down at the Opera House.
Okay, report reading for me up at Avoca. That's what I'm doing.
So I'll be visiting our Year 11 or Year 12 leaders who are currently involved in a leadership camp, and we're one of the venues for the Galston Open Gardens, which is a terrific event in the local area, and I'll be spending some time at the school and and the concluding dinner on the Sunday night.
Right, that's it for us, folks. Next week, we're going to have in Andrew Dice, the piano man, who's going to be talking about music and the elderly. He runs music
The
programs.
Cremorne piano man?
Sorry?
The one in Cremorne?
No, the one in Hornsby.
All right, sorry.
Andrew Dice is his name, and we might also have someone from Wildlife Rescue in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was good fun.
That was
I
great.
enjoyed it.
Thank you very much
That
for
was
having
very,
me.
very good.
That was good. That was good fun.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Neil. Well done.
Well done, Mark. Thank you for coming in. It's good. I mean, it is worth having a regular education.